First up, I'm going to chat to Derry Chambers from Cork Environmental Alliance. Derry, you are very welcome to Centre Ground, and thank you for agreeing to chat to us this evening.
Thank you, Anna. A pleasure.
Well, maybe you might begin by telling us a little bit about the Environmental Protection Agency, what it is and how it came about.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to speak about the Environmental Protection Agency and to separate it from planning, because that's what happened when it was set up. Prior to the establishment of the EPA, there was the companies that are now licensed by the EPA were looked after by each local authority in each county. Excuse me. And in Cork, as you know, Cork was the centre of the pharmaceutical industry, and that the first company to come here was Pfizer's that came in 1969. Then they were followed very quickly after that by other companies, and we were having problems in the harbour. No, they didn't come here because the usual thing, because we're well educated and all this rubbish that you hear from the politicians. They were fleeing the USA because the USA had set up an environmental protection agency there, and they didn't want to comply with the emission limits, the pollution limits that were being put on them there. So they came to Ireland, which also gave them a foothold in the EU, or the EEC as it was at the time. Now, there were many, many problems then with the councils were totally ill-equipped to deal with the pollution arising from these companies. And after 5 or 6 years of, 5 or 6 years after they came in, they were being dealt with specifically with just planning laws. There were no pollution laws as such. And in 1977, the Air Pollution Act was passed, and that required companies such as Pfizer's and others to secure an air pollution license, a water pollution license was 77. And then in 87, the Air Pollution Act was passed. So, I mean, we were very late getting into the game of controlling pollution. And that caused many, many problems in the harbour and many scares about the health impacts of these emissions, which by their nature are, in many cases, quite dangerous to human health or to public health. We campaigned at that stage then. I mean, we had a headline one time on as it was then, the Cork Examiner, schoolyard awash with vomit. That was in Monkstown Primary School. All the kids got sick because of an emission from a plant. Now, they were all clustered together in the harbour, so which one had done it was impossible to tell. So the council ended up prosecuting 3 different companies. 2 fought it, 1 pleaded guilty and were fined, and the charges against the others were dropped. And because of all these kind of things, we were campaigning for an environmental protection agency, which in hindsight wasn't the wisest thing we ever did, because we got one. And, the outcome, the way things stand now is the planning situation, the local authority and then on board Canola will grant planning permission to build a facility, and then it gets a license from the EPA. Which is, it's a bit of a joke, really, because, for instance, we're dealing with an incinerator at the moment by Indover, which is a long-running thing. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But they now have planning permission at the moment, and it's held up because it's in the High Court. But if they build their plant and spend 200 million quid building it, it is highly unlikely that the EPA will turn around to them then and say, look, we're not going to give you a license, because the EPA are over a barrel then. And it was a very neat way of, prior to the establishment of the EPA, we could object in the planning system on environmental grounds. We can't do that anymore. So we're strictly on planning issues now, roads, that access, all that sort of thing. So more often than not, our grounds for objecting to a facility is limited by the fact we can't talk about the environment. Then they get planning permission. Then they build the whatever they've applied for, whatever factory or chemical plant or incinerator in this case. And it's almost impossible. How are we supposed to stop them getting there is no situation where the EPA would then refuse to give them a license to operate that plant after they're spending that much money. So,
okay. If I can just halt you there, I think we might be able to get up a video that might explain a little bit about the campaign to try and halt the building of an incinerator in Cork Harbour. I think that Stephen might actually have that video ready to roll now.
Burning our waste is a bad deal for our community and for our planet.
Incinerators have an amazing appetite. They've got to keep going flat out. And if there's not enough waste delivered locally, then it has to be imported.
When you burn wastes, it's a big mixture of many, many things, including synthetic materials like plastics, heavy metals, radioactive materials. And when you set fire to them, you don't destroy them and make them disappear. You just change the form that they're in, and you turn them into gas and ash and particles. Nobody disputes these days that being exposed to high levels of particles is actually injurious to your health.
Incineration is going in the opposite direction to a circular economy. The linear economy is extraction of raw materials, transporting them around the world, manufacturing products, consuming those products, throwing them away to produce waste. If you simply burn that waste, you are the ultimate act of the linear society. If you want to get to the circular economy, you've got to abandon incineration and start recovering resources.
Enormous financial forces are pressuring government, pressuring the people in government. And government know that they have to deal with waste, and so we can change our habits. We are the people that industry is selling to. If we say we don't want that, they're going to change.
So what we need to do is to get into a virtuous circle, which means that if something is being produced that is problematic, we phase that out, we substitute it with things that are much more sustainable, recyclable, reusable, and which have much less impacts on the planet and on our own health. And then if you do that, then you don't need incinerators.
So, Derry, one of the issues, one of the really big issues is the fact that there is a transfer of personnel from private industry over to the EPA. So you might like to tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, because we're a very small country, there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between regulatory bodies and industry. You know, I mean, it's a very, you know, sort of environmental science. The areas that regulators would work in would also be the fields that are in, you know, would be open to them. The only other places open to them in Ireland is back in the industry. And we have had situations where, we have many situations where there's an interchange of personnel. For instance, going back right to the beginning of the EPA, when it was established in 1993, within 2 or 3 weeks, there was an explosion in a chemical plant in Cork Harbour. Hickson's, it blew up and it cost at the time, £45 million worth of damage to their own plant, and dumped a load of toxic waste or toxic chemicals, or they didn't dump it, but it spilt into Cork Harbour. The environmental officer with the council, or with Hickson's at the time, had previously been an environmental officer with Cork County Council regulating the industry. Then he moved to the industry, and now he's back with Cork County Council as a senior executive engineer with Cork County Council. And that sort of movement between them goes on all the time, you know. And it's not healthy, you know. It's not a sensible way of regulating industry.
We've had the situation with Mary Kelly in the EPA.
Yeah, well, Mary Kelly started in IBEC working in promoting incineration. She then moved to the EPA and was supposed to be impartial and objective there. You know, I'm sure she was. But I mean, bear in mind, her previous job had been promoting incineration. Then she moved to Bord Pleanála and became chair of Bord Pleanála. She's just very recently retired. We've also had the project manager for Indiver, the company who are trying to build the incinerator in Cork Harbour. She started off as project manager for the incinerator company for the proposal of Cork Harbour.
That's Laura Burke,
yeah,
yes.
and now she is Director General of the EPA. And, you know, it seems that we're not playing on a very level playing pitch, you know. Now, I'm not casting any aspersions on these people's integrity or anything, but it would be, how can I say, they have far more in common with the companies than they have with the people who bear the consequences of those companies. And you must remember that when the EPA issue a pollution license, that license is worth millions and millions of pounds, because effectively it's giving the company permission to dump on your community, to pollute your community. It's making it legal what they do to your community. And we know from countless studies that what comes out the stack of an incinerator, for instance, is highly dangerous. And unless it's regulated well, and it hasn't been, there are many incinerators, in-house incinerators working in the harbour over the years, and there are major health problems in Cork Harbour. Now, we've never had a health study, despite 40 years of asking for one. But I mean, there's the perception that there are health problems. I mean, the cancer rate in Cove, for instance, is over 40% above the national cancer rate. It's 40% above that. Cove is right next to 400 meters off the coast, or off the seafront in Cove. The county council and the EPA, between them, over the years, allowed 2 million tonnes of toxic waste to be dumped into Cork Harbour. It's sitting there in the harbour now, forming part of Haulbowline Island. But this is for, there's things like chromium-6, PCBs, cesium-137, dioxins. They're all in there, and all the heavy metals. 2 million tonnes of it sitting there. And
okay, well, Derry, the more I talk to you, the more I realise that we could dedicate an entire programme to this. And I'm very conscious that we have other people that we want to speak to. Just to finish off, Derry, what is the situation now with Endeavour and the proposal to build that incinerator in Cork Harbour?
Well, they applied first in the year 2001. They announced their plans in 2000. We've had 3 planning appeal hearings before on Board Canola. In each case, the inspector, that is the person appointed by Board Canola to chair the hearing, has ruled in our favour. But the board, the people like Mary Kelly and so on, they overruled their own inspector and allowed the project to go ahead in each of the 3 cases. At the moment, the 3rd time they've got it, it's now, that was in 2016. It was heard, we objected to the High Court in 2018, and we're still awaiting a decision on that. In the meantime, Endeavour have submitted an application to the EPA for a licence to run this incinerator, but the EPA are just sitting on it and will do nothing until the High Court makes a decision,
Okay, and so that's where it is at the minute.
Fighting that,
Okay, well, Derry, thank you so much, and we'll be coming back to you later in the programme